So, my name is Matthew Contour. I am going to be turning 18 this next week, actually, Tuesday. And I'm a graduating senior from OSHA, the Orange County School of the Arts. To give you a little background about me, I started theater when I was in 6th grade and just basically kept doing it ever since. I loved it. I've worked with a lot of theater companies. I auditioned for OSHA for 7th grade, and I got into the musical theater conservatory, and I've been there for 6 years, going to graduate in a week. So today I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Joel GoldTheDialectCoach, who is a dialect coach. He's worked on so many different projects. He's worked on Come From Away on Broadway. He's worked on Gotham, the TV show. Just very talented. I've watched a few videos of him working. Insane. Here he is. Thank you so much for being here. And here is Joel GoldTheDialectCoach. Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry about that delay.
Oh, no problem. This is my first live. All right. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Your audio dipped rather substantially when I came in.
Oh, really?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's all right.
Are we good?
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, sorry. I'm nervous.
Don't be nervous.
So working as a dialect coach, what is that like? Like, what's your process? How do you work with people? What's your process of helping with dialects?
Well, it sort of depends on what the project is. So it's a different approach if I'm prepping someone for, say, an audition, or if I get hired to work with them on a job, or if producers hire me to work on set. Generally, the one of those that gives us the most time is if they come to me for the audition or to work with them to prep them for the job. Time is always a huge advantage. So what I'll do is I'll take them through a tool that I use a lot. You can see this on my website. Can you see this much?
Yeah, you can see it.
This is called the vowel chart, and it shows where a part of your tongue moves in the mouth to make the various vowel sounds that we use. So in the best of all possible worlds, I'll take them through that. It takes 5 or 6 minutes to go through. Then if there's time, I'll take them through the sound changes of the accent that we're working on. A lot of times if I'm hired to go on set, there's no time for any of that. Sometimes I just have to show up and start working with the person the day they're shooting, which is the worst possible proposition because there's no time for them to assimilate what they're trying to change about their accent. So if we have days or weeks ahead of time, they can take it all in, get comfortable with it. Then it's not like they're thinking only about that when they do the job. You want that stuff to go well into the background so that they can think about what they want to accomplish in the scene. And that's best accomplished when there's a lot of time in advance. But sometimes that's just not the case. Sometimes a producer will hire me to prep someone, and then we get the luxury of a bit of time to go through that. And that's always best. But I have to be ready to just walk onto a set and say to someone, well, let's hear what you got, and kind of tweak it as we go as they get ready to shoot. So it just depends on the situation, what the approach is.
Yeah, so how often are you called onto set the day of, and what's the most often, which procedure do you work with the most? Like, do you work with them most of the time beforehand, or is it most of the time you're called to the set to do it?
Well, I'd say things have changed pretty substantially in about the last 10 or 15 years. It used to be the case that producers would be much more willing to pay for an actor to have a dialect coach if they didn't know the accent. So it was more common that I would go to set and work with someone in that circumstance. what's happened is that producers are shifting the burden onto the to the talent. So if they don't know the accent, then the person has to hire a coach themselves. So that's much more the case in the last few years, I would say. So it's less common that I go to set if there's, let's say there's an English actor who needs to sound American. That's pretty common that they'll have a dialect coach on set. But now, because the world is the casting pool, if they need someone with a Spanish accent or a French accent, a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, they're going to hire talent from that place who has that accent already, so that they don't have to worry about hiring a coach in, which is expensive for them. So they're trying to save as much money as they can. And that's how they do it, is by making the actor do it themselves.
Okay, yeah. And what has been your favorite project to work on so far that you've done?
It's probably After Earth, this Will Smith movie for which they asked me to create an accent.
Wow.
Yeah, the film was set 1,000 years in the future when everyone had left Earth because it was so polluted. So the theory was that I think it was 5,000 people left and traveled out into space for 1,000 years through generations and then landed on this planet. And so they wanted an accent that would reflect American English as it had been affected by the sounds of the dominant world languages over 1,000 years. So that was cool for one thing, to make up the accent. But then we got to shoot in Costa Rica and in Philadelphia and Northern California in the Redwoods, and then in the desert in Utah. So that was just unbelievable. We had a great, great time.
Yeah, that's very cool. How, like, that's so insane that you could create your own accent.
Yeah, it was crazy. So I tried to do some reading about it, and in my research, what I ended up doing was finding the dominant world languages and taking sounds from those, because American English is so unique and sort of peculiar that people who come from all different language backgrounds tend to sort of make the same mistakes in American English. So, you know, we use a lot of diphthongs, which is 2 vowel sounds that are sounded as one syllable. So like we say go, we make 2 vowels, O. So I changed it to just being 1 vowel, go. Instead of saying I, it was just I. So it was sort of making shortcuts, not saying THs like this and that, but kind of shortcutting them to this and that, so that it was continuing the way that we've made shortcuts through the way American English has changed from British English, for example, in the 300 years we've been here. Just kind of continuing that and thinking, okay, what future shortcuts would we make to English? And that's what I came up with. But we're kind of like, I could just do anything because nobody knows what it's going to be. So I could pretty much just do whatever I wanted, and that's what I would have taught the cast. So it was pretty great.
Yeah, I saw in the chat, John asked, did you pull from any specific accents and combine them? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, so what I found in my research was that they had said, so Will Smith was one of the producers on the movie, and he said they had learned that it was the 5 dominant world languages. So it was like Mandarin Chinese, French, Spanish, maybe German, and something else. So I went to all of those accents and found sort of the commonalities and put them together. And that's sort of how I came up with the accent. That was part of what I did, was absolutely taking aspects of those languages. And I've worked with people who speak all those languages. So it was taking how they change American English and putting that together. That's
very cool. We have another question in the chat. That was, what's your favorite accent that you have helped someone learn?
Well, I love them all. I mean, it's just a blast to help somebody change their accent. But I've done a lot of English accents. I actually exchanged sessions with a linguist who's English. And he would help me with my English accents, and I would help him with his American accents. So I felt like I got quite good at standard English and Cockney, and sort of the accent that's kind of in between those two, sociologically, sort of a contemporary London accent. So I like those a lot, and those feel really solid, but I like working on anything.
Oh, I see. Someone asked, can you demonstrate a broad Southeast London accent?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you put me on the spot now, huh? Yeah, you talk like this. You say like, hello, I'm down here in London and I'm sitting on the Thames River, you know, and so you talk like that. It's a lot about it. I've been teaching it a lot lately, and it's fun because you sort of travel around your mouth a lot. Your tongue gets to do a lot of work. But it's fun because of that. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. A lot of people probably have this question, but what is the difference between an accent and a dialect?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's no real difference in the way we use them. Most Americans use them interchangeably. What they truly mean, that like the dictionary definition of dialect is different words. Like in Massachusetts, some parts of Massachusetts, instead of calling a water fountain, we call it a water fountain. Where you get a drink of water, they call it a bubbler, like a bubbler.
Okay,
so
yeah.
It's using a different word for the same thing. So that's dialect. That's truly the definition of dialect. But we use accent and dialect interchangeably, so there's no real difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you get into your profession? Like, what made you become a dialect coach?
Well, I had always liked accents as a kid, so I listened to a lot of Monty Python records when I was a kid. And as an actor, I always tried to get cast in shows that would involve accents. I was always trying to get accent roles. And then I went to graduate school at the University of California at Irvine.
Hmm.
And the graduate program there didn't really have a focus while I was there, but we all took 3 years of voice and speech classes, so that the voice and speech sort of defaulted to being the central, like the core of the program. And I started to teach while I was in grad school. I taught voice and speech. And then everywhere I worked as an actor, I would also either coach productions I was in or started coaching people on the side. I moved to New York and acted for a while and got as far as like off Broadway. And then I was offered to direct a one-act play. And once I started that, I just quit acting completely and just didn't know why I'd ever been an actor. And then I directed and produced off-Broadway theater for a while, and then realized I didn't like being in charge of the whole picture. So it was very useful for me just to be in charge of one small part of a production, and that I could do with dialect coaching. So I've been doing that for about the last 25 years.
Yeah. And you mentioned UCI.
Yeah.
And I know that during your graduate program, you were teaching classes at UCI. So how did that help you in your career path?
Oh, well, that was great. I mean, that set me up to have my own practice, really, because I had to teach a class twice a week for 10 weeks. And so you have to fill out a whole curriculum. And so using that was very elemental in sort of setting me up for the rest of my career, which I didn't really get into until about 8 or 9 years later, probably. But then I actually went back to UCI and taught 2 quarters of acting after I moved back to California from New York. And that just kind of taught me that I don't really like teaching acting. I had a good time. I especially enjoyed teaching a character class there. But I'm happier to be in the private sector and working. The big thing is I think working with people who really want to do something, to learn something that I have to offer, as opposed to just having to take a class at school to satisfy their requirement. So there's just a real difference in the approach the students bring when they come to me versus when, I'm just the teacher of a course they're taking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So I see you're wearing your Come From Away shirt.
Oh, yes.
So what was it like working on that show? 'Cause that's a very different, has to be very different than working on TV.
Yeah, huge difference. And yeah, somebody's just asking about the West End production versus the Broadway cast. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. But the huge difference is time. It's like the first question you asked me, the difference between working with people privately beforehand or working on set.
Mm-hmm.
We had 2 years to develop Come From Away before it opened on Broadway. And honestly, things have changed since it's opened. It was a huge learning experience to go through. We did 4 out-of-town tryouts: La Jolla, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and then Toronto before Broadway. And then the Canadian production had been so successful that the producers up there decided to establish their own sit-down production in Toronto. So going back and teaching what had taken 2 years to teach the Broadway cast to the Toronto cast in 4 weeks, that was a huge learning experience. And then to get to do that with the North American tour, which we had out, and then the West End production, and then ultimately the production in Australia, totally different. Yeah, the West End production was crazy because they're all British English speakers. We had 2 people that were Irish, one from Northern Ireland and one from the Republic. Yeah, so that was insane. Trying to cram, again, like 2 years of learning into, I think I ultimately visited the English cast 4 times, and they previewed in Dublin. So I went to Dublin. I think there were 4 trips to London and 1 to Dublin. So that was big. And then we just had a big cast replacement there, the first of this year, where half the cast, the onstage cast, left the company. So we had to train in 10 replacements. And to do that in a week was, again, just insane. And not nearly enough time. And if this whole pandemic hadn't come down, I was about to go to the producers and say, look, I need more time with these people because the principals hadn't gotten the time. And then we have understudies for the show. And in London, there are 8 understudies for the 12 roles. And they all have to learn 4 or 5 different roles. And so that's just mind-blowing, really tricky. So for them, they have to learn American accents and Canadian accents. And yes, it is difficult to teach someone with a British accent an American accent. Yes, Jen Tierney. She's one of our crack standbys. Good friend of yours. Nice. Yeah, she's Scottish, actually, originally. So it's very tricky I could sort of, there's a few pages in the show where with the American company, and to a certain extent with the Canadian company, I could just kind of check out during a run through because they're all American accents. But in London or Australia, they're all in a different accent all the time, except there's tiny places where they do English accents, Australian accents. So, yeah, it is tricky. It has a lot to do with doing R's after vowel sounds. I'm saying mother and father instead of mother and father. So there are lots of sound changes. And there's sometimes cases where people will make a sound change in a word because they think they're supposed to in that accent, even though it doesn't actually happen in the accent. So they sort of anticipate something and they overcorrect it. So you have to keep an ear out and bring all those things back into what really happens. So it can be very tricky.
Yeah. I was just thinking, is there a difference between teaching someone to sing in a dialect and speaking in a dialect?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And honestly, it's one that we didn't address in Come From Away until the second production in Seattle. The company was so saturated with information. They had added a song during 1 week of previews. In one afternoon, they added a song. They rehearsed it in, and then they decided the song didn't work, so they took it away. So they had to go and do the show that night and remember all the stuff from the morning, that they had been doing. So we didn't even think about singing in dialect, but then realized in Seattle that it was very useful for the audience to hear the little Gander Newfoundland accent when they're singing, because it helps clarify who is singing. So what character they are when they're singing. And it's challenging that I guess we tend to sing in a sort of mid-Atlantic sound. We don't really say R's after vowel sounds when we sing. It's sort of American sounding. So yeah, we did have to sort of put the accent where we could into the songs. And then the musical director, Ian Eisendrath, and I would sort of negotiate. And I would always just default to Ian. He was like, that sounds funny when it's sung. And I'd say, okay, don't have him sing it then. So we got 95% of it in, which is great.
Yeah.
But it's challenging, yeah, to have him sing with that sound as well. But very useful for the audience.
Yeah, and I was thinking during this quarantine, having a very hands-on job with actors, how have you adapted to a new normal during this quarantine?
Yeah, well, parts of my job have totally gone away. Like, there's no more going to set. I had been visiting the Broadway production and Toronto and the North American tour 3 or 4 times a year. So I would go travel to them, watch shows, take notes, work with the standbys for an afternoon, make sure everything was on track. That was great. That's been great. I've loved that. So I've really missed the traveling and visiting those casts. And of course, the shows aren't running now. But they would also send me audio of each show, like every couple of months, so I could review that. I could still do that. So if the shows started up and there was an issue with me traveling to those cities, I could still do that part of it where they send me the audio, I send back notes. The other big part of my practice is largely done online. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. I started with Skype. And then a couple of years ago, I started doing Zoom sessions. And I found that, here I'm using visual aid. With Zoom, I could add my iPad into a session so the actor can see my notes in their script while I make them.
Okay.
Which is really useful because it takes out like 30% of the talking. If they just see what I've circled or underlined, or if I've written a note, they can just see that and start to work on it immediately. So if anything, that part of my practice has gotten easier because people are much more accustomed to Zoom now.
Yeah.
Where, 10 years ago, I'd have maybe 30% of people would say, oh, I don't want to use Zoom. I want to come out and see you and do the session in person. And now everybody knows what Zoom is, and they're all quite accustomed to it. So that's actually helped me. So that's great.
I saw there's a question in the chat. Do you come across a lot of people who can't seem to hear differences in vowel sounds, and how do you work with that?
Yeah, that's common, and that's why I think it's kind of deceptive to sell CDs of accents, like how to do an accent, because I think a huge number of us have a hard time hearing sounds that we don't use in our original accent or language. So I found through my practice that once you can be shown how to make the sound, and that's why I use this thing a lot. I explain it to my clients. And like, here's the diphthong I spoke about. A diphthong is 2 vowels that are sounded as 1 syllable. So we say go, we make 2 vowels, go or so. So in an Irish accent or in the Gander Newfoundland accent, you would just say go, go. So once you can be shown how to make the sound, then you can start to hear it. And then you can start to imitate it in native speakers of the accent. But without being able to do it, your ear can't hear it, and you go, oh, all I hear them saying is go. So that's why I say I think it's kind of deceptive to sell CDs, because a lot of people can't hear the differences. I had an experience with an actor years ago. We were doing a play at La Jolla Playhouse, and she was anxious to get started on the accent. She said, please send me some samples of some people doing it. So I sent her the samples, and she said to me, oh, I couldn't hear any difference. Like, I couldn't hear an accent. So I find that people really have to be shown the difference, demonstrated how to make the new sounds with their tongue. Then they can start to hear it, and then they can start to imitate it. Whereas a lot of times, a lot of us can't hear any difference. So I often have clients say, oh, I never heard this before. We'll talk about something in a session, and then they'll go out and listen to people, and they'll be like, oh, my mind's blown. I didn't know Americans say he can go instead of he can go. they've been saying he can go the whole time, and we reduce that can to can. We say he can go, and they go, oh, I never heard that before. It's amazing. So it's quite something to make a change like that when people have been, you know, speaking English for 30, 40 years or something.
Yeah. We have a question from the chat. Can you say button and literally in a standard American dialect?
All right. So look, we have to start by defining terms. There's really no standard. I belong to a couple of list servers that are a bunch of voice and speech teachers. And on one of them, they've started using the abbreviation. They call it so-called American Standard. So it's SCAS, because there's not really a standard. We don't have a standard like the French have. There's a government agency that's responsible for preserving the sounds of that language. We don't have that. So I can say something standard and somebody else could say something else is standard, and it's right for both people. So, you know, standard is, to me, whatever I teach. So, so what I say and what I teach as standard is button. So it's a stop T followed by what's called a syllabic N. You leave your tongue against the roof of your mouth and go button, as opposed to button, which would be exploding the T, or using a glottal stop like button. So John, you got to tell me which one you've heard as standard. And then literally what I suspect there is either that you might have heard literally, which is sort of English sounding to me, or literally, probably not that with the T as a T. That T becomes a D because it's between two vowel sounds, so it gets voiced. T and T are partners. The D is the voiced version of T, D, and T. So we make that T into a D because it's easier. So literally. What have you heard, John?
He says the first one is standard, but button.
Button. The first one is standard to me, button. Yeah. I go back and forth with received pronunciation, which is like the standard English accent, about whether in English you say button or button. Okay, so you've just typed button, but how do we know? Like, that's what makes it hard with typing. It's hard to know what someone means. Yeah. A lot of times they use transliteration, which is sort of spelling something as it sounds, which is tricky. So do you mean like no vowel before the N, John? Like button? So he starts, but, or is that button? Let's see. Oh, and then someone asked if I could do a Yorkshire accent. Yes, I love that accent. Can I do it off the top of my head? Well, it's trickier, but you make a change in Yorkshire where you'd say when you stress a word like up, instead of giving it a standard English up, you go to up. So it becomes up, and come becomes cum, which is awesome. And then you get those pure O's and A's too, which is sort of related to Scots or Irish. So a lot of these accents in the British Isles are related to each other. They have elements of other accents, or they sound like us as if they do. And it's probably because they may all evolve from different forms of Gaelic. There's Welsh Gaelic and Irish Gaelic, Scots Gaelic. I imagine there's Gaelic in the north of England, which is where Yorkshire is. So that's probably what accounts for that too. Yeah. What's wrong? That's the one my sister uses. What? Hard T. Okay.
I think he's saying button is the one his sister uses.
And then it's wrong, he says. Well, again, you can't really get into issues of right and wrong because what's right for someone is the way they speak. And so it's hard for me to say, you know, if somebody comes to me, they want to learn an American accent. I don't say to them, okay, the way you're talking is wrong. I'm going to teach you the right way to speak. No, it's like you speak in one way. I'm going to teach you another way. And also that allows you the ability to use whichever one you want at the appropriate time. So you're not feeling badly about, oh, I'm talking the wrong way. So I don't consider there to be any right or wrong accent. Yeah. Sorry, you were going to say? No?
Oh, no. I was just wondering, during the quarantine, what things can we do at home to stay artistic and creative?
Well, there's a lot available on the internet now that wasn't available even certainly not 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to learn an accent, you know, you can go to YouTube. this is something that I do all the time that I never used to be able to do. You just put in the name of that place, and then you put in English and accent, and you won't get every video that comes up won't be totally useful, but you'll be able to find people speaking English in that accent. And then you want to listen to the sounds they're making, not the sounds you think they're making. So you want to listen very purely to what they're saying and try to imitate that exactly, not what you think they're doing. So you might record them and then record yourself. There's a ton of accent resources available on the web that weren't there a few years ago. There's one that's, I've forgotten the name. I think it's accentsarchive.com or .org, but it's the International Dialects of English Archive that has thousands and thousands of samples, people reading a standard story and then reading off the top of your head. So you can listen to people you choose by the geographical region, and then you can listen to people from that place and, again, imitate what you hear, try to break down what's changing for them. And here's a big hint. In any accent, a lot of the sounds that are used are the same as the ones we use. So a lot of things don't change. You want to focus on the things that do change. Mm-hmm. So the vowels that are different, or diphthongs, two vowels, which might turn into one vowel, how the consonants change, and then the difference in the melody and the placement in the mouth and the rhythm of the sound. So it's not everything that changes. You just want to focus on the things that are different. Try to listen for the things that are different. So there's a lot that you can do during the pandemic online that you couldn't do before. There's tons of video, movies, actual theatrical films that are available now that weren't available 3 or 4 years ago. So you can watch whole movies in different accents from all around the world, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Just gonna wrap it up a little here, since we're running out of time. But are there any organizations or anything that you want to plug to make the viewers known about, or anything?
Sure. Well, I'm teaching away during the pandemic. I have clients who have a few auditions. There have been a few auditions coming along, which is unusual. So yes, I am coaching privately. I do. It's all on Zoom, and they're hour-long sessions. And to learn an accent for an audition is usually one session to get enough nuts and bolts to put it onto 4 to 6 pages of sides. Some people want to learn an accent to keep in their back pocket so that when it comes up, they have it available. That takes more, 3, 4, 6 sessions maybe. A lot of times someone will come to me and want to do a package of accents. So they'll sign up for 6 or 12 sessions, and we'll go through 3, 4, 5, 6 different accents. And once you learn one, it's much easier to learn others because you can compare them to each other. So it gets much, much easier to learn them. I'm also doing a lot of work with international people and people from around the U.S. who want to sound like they don't come from anywhere particularly. So it's that standard American or general American accent. And I have ongoing clients like that all around the world. I have a guy in Morocco that I'm working with right now, and a couple people in Australia, Canadians, and somebody in New York. So people from all over the world are taking advantage of this stuff now. So that's great for me.
Yeah.
Oh, great. And I'll mention my website, which is thedialectcoach.com. And so there's information there. And an explanation of this vowel chart. How many total private clients do you coach regularly? Well, it varies. Part of it is how much is going on. Like if it's pilot season, I might be seeing 5, 6, 7 people a day for several weeks. Yeah. Just because it's busy and there's a lot of jobs becoming available. Right now, things are slower because the whole industry is shut down. So, some days I'm doing 1 person a day. Tomorrow, I think I suddenly have 5 people, which is fantastic.
Yeah, great.
So it varies. But I have noticed it's picking up a little bit as people are kind of settling in and noticing, okay, we're going to be here for a while. I might take a little time to learn something that I've always wanted to learn. Then they're reaching out a little bit more. So that's great.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. That was Joe Goldes. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
Thanks. My pleasure. It's great to meet you, Matt.
Great to meet you too.
Great. I'll just enter my website down here in the chat.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.